Welcome to the Fatality Free Future podcast. I'm John Barclay.
My name is Holly Ferguson. This is the podcast where we explore the challenges and possibilities of creating a fatality-free future. And this is officially the start of Season 2.
Season 2, yes.
So for those who listened to Season 1 or didn't listen to Season 1, what do you think will be the differences, John, between this one and the last season?
Yeah, look, I think in Season 1 we had the opportunity to sort of start introducing some things that are important to us around serious injury and fatality prevention. Obviously, in Season 2, I want to take the opportunity to dig into that a little bit more, right, and actually start to get into some deeper conversations around those key elements around serious injury and fatality prevention. Last
season, we kept it internal. You know, we had people within the Barclays community come in. This time, we're inviting external guests, which is quite exciting.
I think the good thing about Season 1, it did give us a chance internally to get into this routine and get into the process. And now that I think we've got a really good established routine for it, it's an opportunity to bring in some external people and start hearing from some other people.
Yeah, so what are your goals this season, would you say, John?
Oh, I think it's just to keep adding value for our listeners. I hope our listeners are starting to get some insight, some learning, some practical things to take away. And I just want to keep bringing that. But this season we get the opportunity by doing that, by talking to some other people who are subject matter experts in certain areas, a little bit outside of our expertise or complement our expertise.
And that brings us on to today's topic, which is leadership routines. So John, talk us through what is a leadership routine?
A leadership routine, in the name, is a routine that gets set up for leaders to do. I've learnt probably over the last few years talking about leaders' routines rather than setting KPIs for leadership activities. I think what I've found, and I guess what I've been reading about and understanding, is there are certain things leaders should be doing every day as a part of their everyday routine that establishes just good standard practices. And that's the opportunity I think we have, even with SIF and safety in general, is to start talking about these as routines, not as set KPIs or activities, because leaders are busy. They have a lot of things to do. There is a lot of balls that they're juggling, and trying to get them to understand a day in the life of a good leader has some set routines to it. So what do I mean by a routine? If I'm going to talk about safety routines, I mean, there's some pretty obvious ones for people. It's the start of the shift. So what's the start of the shift routine that has been established? And most industries would probably talk about those as pre-starts or shift starts or PSIs, depending on your organisation. So that I would class as a routine. It's a routine you get into. And what that does is it sets the tone for the day. Then there's probably a process around just the detailed task planning. So how do you make sure everyone's understanding exactly what the work is today, exactly what the critical elements to consider for the work today? It's not generalised, it's very specific to what's happening today. Then there's probably some other routines that throughout the day come, which is probably just more of a set check-in type process. So going out and checking in to see how work is progressing. Was it as we planned? Right, everything we imagined, is that going to plan? Has there been some things that have made it difficult or challenging? And is there some input from the leader that's needed to try and help navigate those processes? And they can be done by different routines, such as just a general leader in the field, go a bit on a listening tour, or it could be a very specific thing that's required, which might be a workplace inspection, it might be a critical control verification, it might be a specific auditing process. But leader routines are really about trying to establish that as a behavioural thing for leaders to do.
So how do we go about fitting SIF awareness into these routines?
I think this is the important factor, right? So most leaders I've experienced are doing these routines and doing them to different levels of effectiveness. And I think at the forefront of any routine or any activity, any engagement with the team should be making sure we all understand what's the things that can kill us, or the sticky, which we spoke a bit about, the stuff that can kill us. So that conversation really does need to be at the forefront, and it needs to be used by leaders as a common conversation, whether it's in a pre-start, whether it's in a risk assessment, whether it's going out in the field and just checking in on the work. That sticky stuff needs to be at the forefront of it every day. And that's where that SIF awareness starts to become integrated into just everything we do. There's fatality risk, especially in high risk industries. There's fatality risks in most things that people are doing. So it is really important that those conversations are genuine, they're curiosity, they're exploring, they're understanding, and it's really making sure that people feel like getting that stuff right is really important to our leaders.
The key word that you mentioned there was conversation. I feel like I've heard a lot of your experience on site, and whether it's through yourself or Alan, you've said that leaders have a tendency to broadcast rather than engage.
Yeah, and look, I think that's the key thing, conversation. And I think we all have habits built around how we have conversations, and everyone has conversations in a different way. And I guess, broadcasting is really it's just me. I'm doing a bit of that at the moment, right? This is broadcasting. And the other end of that spectrum is the other person doing all the talk. So one of the quality checks I get leaders to do after any conversation they've had in the field is just reflect on who did most of the talking. And if it was you as the leader, then you might have been doing more broadcasting. If it was the team or the individual that you were having a conversation with did most of the talking, then you're probably on the spectrum of more of that learning, engaging, coaching type conversation. So it's just understanding the effectiveness of these things is when it's a two-way conversation. There's an opportunity to reinforce expectations, but there's an opportunity for learning. And someone said to me a few times now over my career is, while you're talking, you're only repeating what you know. When you're listening is the opportunity you get to learn something. So while you're talking, you're not learning.
And do you feel like people are uncomfortable entering into these conversations because it's the unknown?
Yeah, totally. And I think it's different for every individual. I think there's different reasons why people engage in conversations in different ways. Sometimes it's just purely a personality trait. There's some personality traits that like to just do the talking and feel uncomfortable with silence and feel uncomfortable with not contributing. Sometimes it can be an element of just going through the motion. Like, I've just got to get out, I've got to have a conversation, I've got to check in on a few things, so I go do that, and it's really quick. And that's driven by a couple of things. It could be just purely low value in the conversation piece, or it could be I've got limited time. And I know I've got to go out and check on a few things. So I'll go out and I'll do it very quickly, and I'll do more broadcasting than conversation. Other times I've gone out, it's been an interesting one, is some leaders are really protective of their team, and asking questions of their team and them getting it wrong and feeling uncomfortable or not knowing the answer can sometimes be stepping into that rescuer behaviour of, well, I'll just tell you everything again and just make sure you clearly understand and get the closed questions going, so I get the yes and no response. And that's sometimes the supervisor or the leader protecting their team from being overly challenged.
And we need to be conscious about that behaviour and making sure that we don't slip into using checklists.
Yeah, and look, I think a couple of times when I've been out with leaders, they do it and they're not aware of it. And this is why I think the more we go out and shadow each other, and I'm not just going to go downward coaching, just each other as leaders, so we can give each other some reflective questions back around how we're engaging. So what I mean by that is I've been out a few times where leaders have gone and asked a great question and then answered their own question. And what that does is it makes the leader feel a couple of things. One is I am going out and asking questions and engaging my team, but I'm also speeding up the process, and I'm also saving my team from having to look bad in front of someone else that's with me. So there's a few things going on there. I have had others, though, when they go and talk. There was one recently where we're on site and they were out, and the leader had great energy, great communication skills in regards to broadcasting, in regards to setting and clear communication. There wasn't a lot of two-way happening, and what was actually happening was they were asking a question such as, so what are the critical controls you've been putting in place? And then we'd just quickly go, and I know we've set up the barricading, and we went through this morning where we actually put up the exclusion zone over here, and I know we've actually gone and spoke to the people working next to us to make sure those sim ops don't cause us problems. So it was just an example where a leader had asked a pretty standard, good, open question around getting the person to talk, but then went along the way of actually summarising everything they'd been doing throughout the day, which, again, one of the other reasons why we want to have conversations with people, and we talk about these in different episodes as well, is just around people getting to autopilot, right? So people can be working through these things unconsciously and not actually recognising some of these things in a consciously critical thinking way. So having a good conversation back and forth can help impact that, right? It can actually help people get back into some critical thinking. I find it really interesting that it needs to be a two-way conversation, and some people think they're doing it until someone goes out with them and actually reflects back on how that conversation went.
And for those who maybe didn't listen to season 1 or are not super familiar with your background, what is your role when you're there on site with them?
We do a few different things, and I'll summarise it in the simplest term. We're there to shadow leaders in their role in the field, to give them real-time feedback and connecting between their intention versus their behaviour. So we might think we're asking great, powerful questions, but when someone's there listening and isn't in the depth of conversation, is more just paying attention to what's actually being asked, you start to realise there's lots of closed and leading questions going on, which again, they have their place. They're not bad questions. It's just they are a little bit more limiting in the learning process and the curiosity process, and can stifle conversations a little bit. So my role is, and our team, we go on site, we shadow leaders in their routines, which is what this is all about, this episode, all right? So it might be at a pre-start, it might be them doing a risk assessment with their team, it might be them doing a field verification, a critical control, or just a general leader, being a leader in the field, doing their role, going out and seeing how work's going. So we shadow them and look at those conversations, give them feedback, explore possibilities for doing them more effectively. And it's not a KPI-driven thing. It's not a compliance-driven thing. It's really a development piece for leaders, because we do throw leaders into these routines and sort of expect them to be really good at it. And there's a lot of personal skills that go in there. Some people brand them as soft skills. There's lots of soft skills that go into these things, and I guess that's where our focus becomes.
So if a leader's in one of these conversations and they hear something that causes a bit of concern, what's your advice for handling that in the moment without causing more concern for others around them and setting everyone into a panic?
For me, it comes back to focusing on solution-orientated conversations. How do we get better? What makes it better? What makes it safer? What's going to make it even better than we're doing now, whether it's more efficient, more effective, or safer? And I think sometimes you do go out there and things in a very traditional, old, mature way of safety, maturity level of safety, you might go out and see something and go, I've got to stand this person down. I've got to shut the job down. Then we get into investigation, we get into discipline, we get into all those sorts of processes. More often than not, when you go out and have a look at the way teams are doing, they're working through the process and they're navigating challenges and opportunities throughout the day to do their work. And sometimes those decisions aren't always where we want them to be because they're human. So the leader, if you hear something that's concerning or see something that's concerning, yes, you have to sort of get in, and I'll talk more about just pause and get into a holding conversation where you can look at what is it, how did we get here, what would make it better, and then get into solution mode, because it's all about making improvements proactively, not necessarily having to overreact to situations. And it's probably one of the most common things we get feedback on when you do broader culture surveys. Leaders going out in the field, you'll hear back from them, well, people dread it because leaders come out and just find nothing but problems, or come out and just find problems and make things difficult for people. Really, you want leaders coming out in the field and helping teams feel supported and helping teams feel like they can actually solve problems and work their way through things, which is another question I ask leaders to reflect on after they've gone and had an engagement with someone in the field. Now that we've left and walked away, how do you reckon they're feeling? So if we've just given them a hard time about something, they're probably feeling a bit beat up. They're probably feeling a bit negative and down. That's not great because people don't operate well in that space. Where if they're feeling engaged, they're feeling supported, they're feeling like they've been given the empowerment and the tools to make the work better, then they're more likely to take on those challenges going forward in a much more positive, constructive way.
It's a fair bit of investment that goes on in making sure these conversations go well, or, you can get value out of them. Yeah,
and I think that's why you hear from everybody, well, not everybody, but you're hearing from most people now in the industry, it's moving beyond the compliance, right? Because compliance is I've had a conversation, I've corrected this and I've moved on. But to invest time and energy and actually try to seek to understand what's going on, really get a sense of how people are making decisions, what's impacting those decisions, and come up with really constructive solutions to that together, not imposing things on people. It does take some investment in time, but the time you're investing in that now speeds it up for the future, because the more people are involved in that conversation and value that new process or that new approach or that change of work, they're more likely to do that next time. So yes, I might invest, instead of going out in the field and checking in on the work and taking 10 minutes, I might invest that to be a 20-minute conversation, but it probably means when I come out there tomorrow, it's in a better place than it would have been if I had just done a 10-minute, tell everyone to stop doing something and start doing something else, and then come back tomorrow and they're doing the same thing. I always have a bit of a laugh about this, in that I hear from leaders all the time. I've told them 1,000 times and they still do it. I'm like, well, how's that working for you? Right? It's not working, so you've got to have a different conversation.
Measurement is a really important element of the work we do.
Yeah.
So how can we measure how effective these conversations are? Is there a way of measuring it?
Look, I think if you want black and white measures, it becomes more difficult, right? So if you want a hard and fast percentage measure, it's going to be a lot more difficult. I want to focus more on how are we looking at what are we learning and what are we improving, not necessarily just how many did we do, how many were right, how many were wrong. Yes, you can measure those things. Yes, it gives you some information, but I think it's really important to start focusing on what are we actually learning, right? What are some of the improvements that are happening? So I'd rather start measuring the improvements we're getting rather than just the activities we're doing, because the activities can be misleading. Some people think the more activities we do, the safer we're going to be, but the quality of those activities is what's more important. You can do less with more quality and get better outcomes.
Summarising what we've discussed today and things for people to be aware of, what are the critical things?
Well, I think being very clear on what are the actual leader routines you want. More often than not, they're pretty well established in businesses, but make sure you're very clear on them. Make sure everyone understands their purpose. Make sure everyone understands the intent of those actual routines. They're not a checkbox process. The next thing is, how are you going to shadow leaders doing those things? Right? It doesn't mean whoever's shadowing them is better at it or right. It just means that it's a reflective conversation around how effective those routines are. So one, make sure we're very clear on what our routines are. Two, how are you going to set up a shadowing process so leaders can get real-time feedback and conversations about how they're going? And the third one for me is, how do you progress your measures beyond just participation measures or activity measures and start to actually find a way to measure the levels of improvement that you're getting?
Well, John, thank you very much. I think we're getting back into the routine of this.
Yeah. And again, this is what it's all about. It's setting up the routines and get as effective as them as you possibly can.
Well, episode 1 of the Fatality Free Future season 2 is done and dusted. Thank you, John.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Fatality Free Future podcast. Head to our Fatality Free Future hub on barclays.com for more information and to access everything we spoke about in this episode.